Presented by Caltech.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Ferdowsi. I'm Caltech's Chief Communications Officer, and I am very happy to welcome you all here to this very special event tonight. This is the science behind the Expanse, and we're very happy to be able to put this on. I'd like to thank NBC Universal, Syfy, and Alcon Entertainment for their help in organizing this event, which is a little bit of a new thing for us, and we're very happy to be able to do this. Most importantly, I'd like to thank our panel participants, both from the side of the Expanse and from JPL and Caltech, who have taken their time, not just to appear tonight, but to help us prepare, and I think it's going to be a very fun event. So I would like to introduce our moderator. He is an astronomer and visualization scientist at IPAC, a science and data center for astronomy at Caltech, and he is also a huge fan of the Expanse. So please help me welcome Robert Hurt.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I sort of figure that if you're in this room, you already know that science fiction has always provided for generations inspiration for people to actually become more interested in science, and sometimes even inspires people to go into science and to go into engineering. And that likewise, that the discoveries of science provide the inspiration for the next generation of sci-fi writers who go off and then create even more fascinating stories about our potential futures. And so with that in mind, right, it's just, I think, delightful that tonight we have this opportunity to come together and really discuss the science behind a show that is very deeply rooted in what we do know about physics, what we know about space travel, what we know about the solar system. So let me give you, of course, I'm talking about the Expanse. Let's set the stage for what we're doing tonight by taking a sneak peek at what's going to be coming up for us in the second season.
Someday.
Earth, Mars, the belt, it's all bullshit. There shouldn't be any teams.
That's a beautiful dream, son. But in this world that we live in, you have to pick a side.
Stars are better off without us.
Earth and Mars have pushed themselves to the brink, and whenever that happens, Belters always lose.
Someone was testing a weapon.
It'll tilt the balance of power in favor of Mars.
Are we gonna just keep eating shit from Earth, or are we gonna take them out and end this?
There are people in my government who are willing to take us to the brink of annihilation.
It's treason. Are you scared?
I'm angry.
Whose side are you on? Whose side are you on?
None of us know what we're dealing with here.
My answer is this one up.
Rocinante is ready to roll.
Bombs away. I always wanted to say that.
I was third in command of a crappy ice hauler, and now I'm leading a space station assault.
Who are we? MMC! Who are we? MMC!
We are a go.
Whose side are you on?
Looks exciting. So join me in welcoming our fantastic panelists tonight. First up, I'll bring out Philip Hopkins, who is an associate professor of theoretical physics here at Caltech. Next, we have Wes Chatham, who portrays Amos Burton, the Rocinante's slightly broken mechanic. We have now Bethany Ehlmann, an assistant professor of planetary science at Caltech and JPL. and cast Anvar, whose Martian character, Alex Kamal, pilots the Rocinante. Bobak Ferdowsi, a flight system engineer at JPL, also known as Mohawk Guy. Shohreh Aghdashloo, who plays the very savvy Earth politician, Christian Avasarala. Naren Shankar, executive producer and showrunner of The Expanse. Jessie Christiansen, an astronomer at Caltech's NASA Exoplanet Science Institute. And last, but certainly not least, Franck, co-author of The Expanse books and writer on the TV series. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. I hope we have a fun time digging into the science that underlies this story. So we'll start off, I guess, throwing a question to Ty. I guess it's very typical. Drink more, you're going to need it. It's very typical to ask a writer, where does the idea come from and your inspiration? But what I'd really like to pitch this to you as is, how is it that you framed the story with science as such a fundamental underpinning of it? That not all science fiction really tries to pay much attention to the science, but The Expanse has been crafted with a meticulous care about the science that frames the story.
Well, nobody in this room will understand, but I was kind of a nerd. And I was specifically an astronomy nerd, so getting that stuff right, what the bodies in our solar system are, where they are, how all the mechanics of orbit work was, something I was interested in. So I wanted to include it.
Fantastic. Well, and then sort of continuing the theme with Naren. So in science fiction, traditionally it has been argued that too much adherence to science can get in the way of storytelling. And I mean, so your history actually dates all the way back to being science advisor for Star Trek Next Generation, which had arguably a very different approach to how they would, tech the science to have something occur that progressed the story. But in The Expanse, a lot of actual money has been spent trying to get the science right. Can you just give us a sense of why is this show doing the hard thing and doing it so well?
One of the things that we wanted to do from the outset was to really embrace the idea of space as a character in the show. And a lot of shows have really shied away from it over the years because it was too hard to do, it's too expensive, it takes wire work and time and a lot of special effects to do it actually convincingly. But it was really one of the things that made The Expanse very unique is we portray space as a hostile environment that is constantly trying to kill you, distances that are vast. Time between, it takes a lot of time to get between places. You don't have, gravity unless your ship is under thrust. We've really embraced all of these elements in the service of storytelling because it allows us to do different things and things that people haven't seen before, and I think it gives the show a very unique feel.
Well, and then another aspect of the way science is represented in the show, and particularly interested me when part of my job is using visual imagery to help communicate science to the public. And that's in The Expanse. A lot of what you show is in the science visually, but you don't actually necessarily spend a lot of script time talking about it. But you've designed the production around a very visual portrayal of the way things work. Could you just talk a little bit about how this complicates or how that whole production workflow goes of getting these people to be in varying gravities and so forth?
It's time-consuming, especially ask the actors who have to stay around and hang on wires for hours at a time. It binds in certain places. But,
You haven't made them go to the vomit comet yet for that scene?
They've talked about it, actually. They've talked about it. Look, it's... where do I begin with this? This is kind of a big question.
Well, after all, it's cinema. The language of cinema. It's really the language of cinema. It is as profound and as ambiguated as a scientific, exploration. But at the same time, you were absolutely right. And I'm so glad that you just said that, because I had not noticed that, but I sort of realized that it's different. That it's the picture that is talking, and not necessarily words.
And it's the show not tell aspect too, right? If you put a lot of effort into making the science just look good in the background, you don't have to think about it as a viewer. It just looks real. The world looks real. It's gritty and it's awful. And
I would say mostly it starts with teaching directors how gravity works.
Mark Ferguson, Mark Ferguson, Hawk Osby wrote the pilot, and they developed the show with Ty and Daniel initially. Mark always liked to say, it's like when you get into a car, you don't say, my goodness, what an excellent internal combustion engine I am driving today. It's like, just so you get in the car and you drive it. And so as long as things operate intelligently and logically and within the bounds of physics, we don't talk about them, because the people in the world wouldn't talk about them either.
No. And actually, Ty, beforehand you made a comment about how you taught physics to your director, or how you taught gravity to your directors. Could you just share that one?
Well, actually, it came out of a conversation we had with the production designer, because he was really struggling to understand the layout of things. You know, the standard ship layout is like a cruise ship with the decks running horizontally, and we were trying to explain the sort of office building version of a ship, and he just wasn't getting it. So I sat with him and I drew little terrible pictures on a piece of paper for him. And then he took that, and because he's a production designer and knows how to do art, he made like the nice version of it, where, you know, he made like spin gravity. He made a circle with little people walking on the inside facing inward, and thrust gravity, and he made like a little building with people standing in the, the engine on the bottom, and did those three versions. And every director that came in, and actually even the writers that are on staff, they got one. And so they that sort of explained how it worked.
Yeah, it's important to keep all your gravities straight. Well, let me throw this then out just in general to all of the cast members on the show. Just, can you tell us for a moment, just what is it like working on this kind of very technical show? And maybe, do you have any particularly favorite moments from it? I mean, try not to spoil too much of the second season, but you can be oblique.
I personally, I don't know if it's fair to say, I'm probably one of the bigger geeks on the cast. And so I was hugely excited to be working on such a science-heavy show from the outset. I have to say, coming on this kind of panel at this institution, it's a very different experience than the Comic-Con panels that I'm used to.
They are grading you.
Normally,
and you all will get grades.
Normally we're in the back there talking about comic books and video games and stuff like that. Here we're having discussions about time sink differentials and gravity wells, and I'm like, okay, I'm in a different world here. But it's a very interesting experience working with all the different directors, as was mentioned, because you can really tell the directors who are totally consumed by the science and are geeks themselves versus the directors that are really just much more interested in storytelling. And you'll get directors that say, can't we just, and they'll want to skip something or cut a corner or something.
They'll just try to create technology in the moment. Well, to solve a problem, well, maybe we can just beam something in right there.
That's the other show.
Not this show, yeah.
No, that's Naren's other show. But one of my favorite moments came from season 1. There's another one in season 2, but season 1 has probably one of the most complex scenes I've ever been involved in. I'm not going to. Well, I might spoil it for some of you.
Don't.
But it's a scene that takes place which, in terms of the science that's involved, basically we're in a battle, and we have to deal with thrust gravity, cutting in and cutting out, oxygen being sucked out. We're going from zero gravity to zero gravity. We're floating, we're on wires. One of our members is injured severely. We're trying to stop. Those are people that are familiar with the show, right?
We debated showing that clip and decided.
That's right.
So we're dealing with hypoxia, zero gravity, thrust gravity, and trying to seal the ruptures, and dealing with the physical damages that have happened.
And of course, extraneous calls, the only, or wake-up calls.
And our wake-up
Or
calls.
pick-up calls.
So we've got wire work and
4:45 a.m. The only reason I can stand it is because I love to be a part of this show. I love to portray this character. It's not only exciting for me to portray the character, but it's also so educational to me. I'm learning so much. That's why I still bear with the 4:45 a.m. extraneous wake-up calls.
Well, actually, rolling with that, Shohreh, so your character is pretty much, at the center of everything that's happening on
love
Earth.
this character.
You are making these complex, your character's making these complex decisions, balancing, a deep understanding of science and engineering, the limited resources.
She's so educated.
And frankly, you're pretty much the smartest person in the room in every scene.
She is.
So
she speaks 10 languages.
10 languages.
In 10 languages. And by the way, I have to tell you that I owe this really to Ty, Daniel, James, S.A. Corey, and our brilliant writers. All of us, actors. We owe it to them. They're doing an amazing job in writing these characters, and that's why we can't go wrong with such great writing.
Well, when you sort of build that character and you're sort of in your mind kind of structuring, the secretary's character, right? Do you draw anything from inspiration from like people or from events in the world around you? Is there anything particular?
I have to envision the person, or at least someone close to this person. I started, believe it or not, I started with Margaret Thatcher, and then Benazir Bhutto, Indira Gandhi, Hillary Clinton. Now I am very close to Elizabeth Warren, whom I love and adore. And it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I keep saying that usually I surprise my characters. This time it's this character that keeps surprising me with the arcs that she is taking.
Very nice.
We wrote her as Rahm Emanuel.
I'm even more humble and grounded now.
Back to the books. Well, actually, then, just sort of continuing that, Ty, when this story is structured, right? We have this incredibly shaky situational geopolitics between Earth and Mars and the belt and limited resources, and everything's in this very fragile equilibrium state. Ecology in a kind of solar system sense is a central role. How much of this do you really pull from what's really going on in the world today? And is this like a metaphor for it, or are there things in particular that you really tried to plot and mirror into this?
No, we don't mean to. We keep accidentally doing it. The first book was written before WikiLeaks, and came out right after WikiLeaks. And so because our character James Holden likes to do unscheduled press conferences where he tells a bunch of information, and people say, "Oh, they were clearly commenting on WikiLeaks because of Holden and his dispensary of information." But yeah, we wrote it before that, so we had no idea. And now people keep asking. So in the most recent books, there's an evil character named Marco Inaros, and people keep going, "Oh, Trump, right? He's totally based on Trump." We were writing that character before anybody paid any attention to Trump.
Ty is a great student of history, and Daniel as well. And I think there's a lot of historical influences that are just sort of deeply baked into the book. And I think we tease those out a little bit. And I think as history does, at various points in time, it just starts to feel like echoes of certain periods in Earth's past, the present, and I think that just happens in the books.
Well, can you talk a little bit about how there's kind of different personalities you see portrayed for Earthers versus for Martians versus Belters, and can you talk a little about how those personalities are shaped by this scarcity of resource, the differing conditions that there are in these worlds, sort of the world building behind these different cultures?
You're asking me?
Yeah. If you like, or the Martian, or
the really obvious parallel is Earth is sort of the aging empire. Mars is the new upcoming empire, which we really largely based that on the United States and England after the Revolutionary War. And then, of course, the belt is the third world country that, these countries in Africa that have rare earth materials that we just go in there and strip mine out to make cell phones out of. And the people there.
Wait, who's Hamilton? I need to know.
No, I don't think we ever thought about that. Yeah. No, but that's the obvious parallel.
We haven't had a duel yet.
No. No, but we definitely need to have Shohreh have a duel now.
That sounds like a really good idea. Maybe it's Aaron.
Go ahead.
So, well, actually, following up on sort of the geopolitics, Bethany, I understand that actually you studied environmental policy before you switched over into planetary science. Maybe you got tired of just the policies of environment on Earth and you were curious about the environments of every other planet in the galaxy.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little about, I mean, some of your personal thoughts on how science and an understanding of science needs to inform public policy decisions, and if that somehow shaped how your career trajectory went?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what drew me both to sort of the study of geology and planets on a broad scale. I spend most of my time studying Mars. It's been a pleasure the last year to study Ceres, so I'm thrilled to be on this panel. But what also drives me to environmental science is that it's this complex systems, these interplays between multiple things, between people and the natural system. I think something that both for Mars and for the environment and for this show, that's a huge theme, is the theme of sustainability. Like, what does it take to live within the resources? What are the conflicts that arise when that doesn't happen? But it's one of the same questions that faces us on Mars, which is, how did it sustain water through time or not? Why? So this thread runs throughout, and it's been really exciting to watch this series where that resources and water is such a theme.
Very good. Anybody else? I mean, for your various cast members, the characters that you're portraying from these different worlds, what would you have any kind of thoughts of like what's shaped like a little bit of what you bring into that role from these characters?
Cass, I just curious, like as a Martian, are you inspired by the rovers that we've sent there? Like, do you sort of?
I think we've clearly the Rossi's coloring is definitely inspired by the rovers, yeah, and the tech too, yeah. I'm a huge fan of the work you guys are doing. Very excited what's going to happen in the next 20 years.
Me too.
So, well, now that we've gone on to talking about technology, let's make a shift maybe from the sociology and the geopolitics to more of the hard science fiction elements in this. We know, for instance, in a lot of science fiction, if you need to change course to check out, say, a local distress beacon, it's pretty easy going. You just punch a few buttons, you sip your Earl Grey tea, and you don't really break a sweat, right? But The Expanse has brought to us a kind of different view of how you would make sort of a minor correction to your course to check out a little signal. Let's take a look at a clip here.
We're obliged to change our course and respond. Make sure your acceleration drug dispensers are full. This will be a high G maneuver. Prepare for flip and burn.
Here comes the juice.
Gotta say, that scene always gives me goosebumps. I was like, oh, thankfully, yes, we actually see something that portrays maybe something a little different than we're used to. So let me actually pitch this up to our resident physicist, Philip. If this clip were a student in your physics class, what grade would it be given for its physics midterm?
We get an A.
He is really hoping. So.
Well, fortunately, you picked the guy who's known as the softy grading in the department, so you're fine. No, easy A. Yeah, it gets an A from me. I mean, in general, I'm willing to be pretty grading on a curve for movies and TV if it's cool or moves the plot forward. But I think this is a great example of something where doing the science right or at least, incorporating some of the real effects that would happen, not only, makes scientists like me happy and gives a teaching example to sort of use in class, like make the students work out what would actually happen under that circumstance, but just adds a whole new dramatic element. Like,
Just walk us through kind of what we, give us the physics interpretation of what we just saw there.
Well, this was essentially the thrust gravity that we've heard the term thrown around a little bit before, that, if you're accelerating, then it feels like a gravitational force when you're in something that's accelerating and you're being slammed down against something. This is, every day we're familiar with this just in the sense that if you slam on the accelerator or the brakes in the car, you jerk forward or you slam back, and this is just the sort of that amped up to the extreme where, I'm not sure what the goo is, but clearly you need assistance in this case.
Okay, so
Well,
what I'm
Naren
hearing here,
or Ty, can you actually
on.
tell us what the goo is?
First of all, what I'm hearing is that you gave us a C. That's what I heard. And please, this is a television show. I think we get props for making an act out of turning our ship around. There you go.
I mean, it's a very good object lesson, right? That it's actually really hard to steer things. You got the Voyager, flying out of the system. If someone suddenly decided, oh wait, we need to send it at a right angle to where it's going, right? Yeah, not going to happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, the idea there is that they've been accelerating for days or even weeks, and to look at this signal, they have to slow down to get near it, and so they're shedding all of that velocity over a very short amount of time. So
what are you pumping into your forecast?
Yeah, future juice. But, but the idea is that, we can sustain very high Gs for very brief amounts of time. And the longer the time is, the harder it is to sustain, because you start having things like, burst blood vessels and aneurysms and that sort of stuff. And the idea is that this is some sort of pharmacology that, keeps your arteries pliant when you're at like 10 G for like 7 days, so that you're not blowing blood vessels in your brain and shattering all the capillaries in your eye and that sort of thing. But it's made out of technology.
And that's also the uncommented technology stuff that we're talking about, because I think that, just implicitly we're talking about people who probably have had drugs or some level of genetic engineering built into them to survive hard radiation environments, et cetera. It's just sort of like in the world, and they exist, so that must have happened, but we don't really dwell on it or talk about it.
Okay.
So I have been watching classic Star Trek, and William Shatner does occasionally grab the desk and fall forward in his incredible acting ability. So there is some gravity.
So basically, we do give them props for actually having seatbelts, something the Enterprise never managed to get. Right? So the part of what makes these incredible flip and burn maneuvers possible is this sort of hypothesized Epstein drive in the system, and it enables extremely high accelerations. But what do you want, as a physics professor, and maybe Bobak, talking about how we actually today send probes out into our solar system? Talk a little bit about what you think about the Epstein drive and how that actually compares and contrasts with the things that we really use today to get around the solar system.
I'm very curious how you actually use an Epstein drive. It sounds great. So, one of the things is this has to enable you to travel relatively short times to get between destinations. With our spacecraft right now from Earth to Mars is anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Out to Jupiter or the asteroid belt is years on end. So I'm imagining that this is something that enables you to move a little faster than that. But that scene is actually a really great example, right? We do essentially something very similar to that when we into orbit around Jupiter or Saturn, is that we burn the main engine, which is our high thrust engine, in the kind of the opposite direction of the velocity vector, the direction that we're moving in, to shed speed, and that's how we get captured into orbit. Otherwise, we would fly past the planet that we're actually going to. So I think it's pretty good. If you have any technical advice on how we can build better engines.
It's fusion.
Okay. Well, so JPL actually uses spacecraft that do fire their engines continuously. How does the Epstein drive propulsion compare to the ion drive?
So ion drives are really notoriously weak, right? The engines on Dawn, for example, at Ceres, have roughly the thrust of a piece of paper, the weight of a piece of paper on your hand. What they do is they essentially can thrust that for days and years on end, which means that over time you're slowly building speed. I think, if I remember correctly, 0 to 60 time of Dawn is something like a few days, is it? Yeah. Wouldn't be a great car, but the thing is that low thrust and relatively very efficient thrust allows it to go to orbit two objects in the asteroid belt, Vesta now Ceres. That's something that we couldn't do with the chemical engines that we're more familiar with on most of our spacecraft.
I think one of the things that it's a sign of good writing, I think, is that it's not over-explained in either the books or the TV show. And from a basic physics point of view, the principles are all sound. Like I did actually some back-of-the-envelope calculations. It's not violating any energy conservation laws or anything like that. I did learn in researching for this panel, there are, despite, I think, the writers' attempts to avoid over-explaining the details and trapping themselves into too much, the fans have, of course, made up for this. And there are intense fan debates about exactly, to the point where, people were debating exactly, like, which type of inertial confinement fusion pellets were being used.
The good ones.
Clearly the blue ones.
We only use the best ones.
Ty and Daniel wrote a wonderful novella called Drive, which is about the guy who created the Epstein drive, Solomon Epstein, and what the actual, how it occurred, and it was an accident, and how it, just massive fuel efficiency enabled ships to be constantly under thrust. At like a third G, they could get places very quickly, very, very fuel efficient. And we're actually doing that story, a version of it, in season 2. And it didn't quite make it in the cut, but there was one moment where Solomon is about to explain his brilliant breakthrough and said, the trick was, and another character goes, boring! That was our way.
And suddenly, the sounds of a million physicists' voices cried out in anguish and were suddenly silenced, right? So, well, just throw something out to everybody, if anyone wants to chime in on this. Let's say you actually had an Epstein drive spacecraft. If you could today hop in a ship and go somewhere in the solar system to visit, live, what would be your top picks?
Well, I was a big science fiction fan growing up, and I loved Alien and Star Trek and all of those. And so and Star Wars, and so when I watched those, I always wanted to travel. I always wanted to go see other galaxies beyond. But working on this show, it really gives me a sense of how hard space travel really is and how long it takes.
Right.
You got to shoot that milky goo in you and you're going to be strapped down for 7 days in high G burn. And so you know what? I'm good. I'm good here.
It sounds like a certain character's rethinking his career choices now, right?
What's that?
It sounds like you're rethinking your character's career choices.
Yeah, exactly. Should have stayed in Baltimore.
Anybody else? Any favorite spots in the solar system that
to be honest with
you'd
you,
love to go to?
When I was a kid back in Iran, my brothers and I watched Flash Gordon. Week after week, we were wondering what's going to happen to Flash Gordon and the planet Dead. So I'm dying to see where this planet Dead is, and if I can travel to planet Dead, finally. That would be interesting.
Well, the astronomers have to find it first. But.
Yeah, I think we need to figure out where Mike Brown and Constantine's Planet 9 is. Head out, use that ship to go explore.
Nice. Okay, well, Cass, question for you, because you are the pilot of the show. You're a very good pilot. And it kind of falls on you to sell us on the navigation, the pilot, that this is real. Mm-hmm. So what do you do to kind of get ready for those scenes and kind of bring to, how do you pretend to really know what you're doing? Do you actually know what those buttons do?
I hold my breath a lot. I prep. That's how I get really stressed out and out of breath. Honestly, it was something we talked about quite at length at the beginning. I was really adamant that I wanted to know exactly what I was doing. I wanted to know what this panel was and what that button was, and I kept asking. And then we got to the first ship that I got to pilot all by myself, which was the Knight, the little kind of lifeboat. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And I had my little gear shift kind of handle, and I was so excited about that. And then that didn't last too long. And then finally we get to my lovely Rocinante. And and we got the controls on that, and it was all touch pads. And then I had this bizarre, I don't know where they found it or where it came from, but it was this control panel. There was no stick shift. There was no flying arm, and I was like,
Going back to the like IBM nubbin sort of oversized.
like, where's my
It's
little
a big comeback in
flying arm?
about 200 years.
I can't. And so, and I kept asking, I kept expecting, okay, well, they're going to stick a stick shift in there at some point because they talked about blowing the ship up and refiguring, and I go, okay, my stick shift's going to be there. And it never showed up, so I went, okay, damn it, I'm going to have to figure this out. So I started figuring out, okay, all of my certain functions are on my pad here, and then all my navigation stuff. And I realized, because they kept hammering the gravity into us, in terms of the intensity of it and with the juice and all that, that when we're flying at those intense speeds, we can't really move. You have to be able, and if you're going to be a fighter pilot, it's not just like we're launching a probe to the moon. We literally have to navigate and fight. The navigational stuff, and this is what they kind of told me, is like, you've got to be able to fly with your fingertips. And so I started to figure out exactly where my thrusters were and everything, and it wasn't big movements anymore. It was very finessey, kind of like surgical type of flying. And in the second season, I think you will see very, very quickly the first couple of episodes. There's a lot of really exciting stuff that happens under intense gravity, and we're in a lot of distress, and it's extremely difficult to do all of our jobs under that intense pressure. So I was kind of glad that we had figured out this little very prissy control.
It's not as sexy as the Maverick Top Gun, you know. With the, I want to know where that was too.
Maybe you need a nice, good hand close-up to show this really beautiful finessing. Do that.
It was one of the great disappointments to me also showing up to work to realize that you don't drive a rover with a joystick. I was very disappointed. Like, the childhood me was like, oh, it's software.
I feel you, brother.
What do you drive it with?
Computer code.
Oh, is it? Oh, wow.
Yeah, you don't want to hang
means I'll never get to take it for a test drive.
It's not even a cool touchpad. It's just crushed.
The disappointment was so palpable. That was hysterical.
Well, I think we've dissected spaceflight pretty thoroughly at this point. Let's actually go to another clip now. So we've covered a lot of the ideas of how spaceflight works. Let's take another example from the show of how something is just incredibly simple as just crossing over a catwalk from point A to point B can be made extremely complicated because of science. So let's toss this. Yeah. So let me toss this to Jessie. Okay. There's a lot of science in that clip. Can you kind of step through and unpack that for us? And bonus points if you can like give us every single technical detail that gets represented there.
Well, luckily, it's actually pretty simple. But the exciting thing about this scene is just like pure fan service for science nerds, right? And, we're all science nerds. They didn't need to do that. They didn't need to show us that little vignette, but it was so awesome. So, I mean, the fundamental force at work here is momentum, right? Conservation of momentum is one of the fundamental laws of physics. And so Holden and Naomi, they take off, and they're floating, and they have to conserve momentum, which is to say, if they collide, the same amount of velocity has to be happening. So what happens is Holden realizes this, and he leans back and he kicks her forward. So she's going faster that way, but momentum has to be conserved, so he has to start going faster that way. And you think for a second there's going to be like this George Clooney gravity disappearing off into the black moment, but thankfully he clipped onto her first. So then he gets to do the like, there's no place like home click of the heels to get the mag boots down, which I love, by the way, and then pull her back down. And it's great because it's just like 15 seconds, but it's so cool from a science point of view. So thank you so much.
That's all in the book. Every bit of it. Honestly, it's really that was like kind of chapter and verse, but it's one of the things that makes the show fun to do because you never see a scene like that, and it's still exciting, and you don't have to explain anything, and it's part of what makes the show
and
enjoyable.
you got it right. That's the best part. Like that's how it would work.
I want to show our show over here to these guys every single week.
Right?
I want to come here, and I want you to watch, and I want to listen to you guys bubble over this. This is great.
And then
We can all send you recordings.
When that scene played and my husband and I were watching it, Phil at the other end of the panel, we both turned to each other and we basically clapped. It was just like, oh, wow.
I explained it to Naren that sometimes you have to use your friend as a reaction mass.
And just think how different that scene would have been if their leash cable had been like 2 feet shorter. Yeah, sad. So Wes, actually, your character, you end up kind of front and center in like so much of the action that goes on in this show, whether it's well, getting punched in the face, from what I understand. Whether you're in 0G or you're in low G, you've got mag boots, you're floating off doing repairs, right? Just could you tell us a little bit about what it's like and kind of how physically challenging it is as an actor to basically portray and sell like each of these different kinds of scenarios that you're in. Walking without gravity but with mag boots, or being in no gravity. Just what kind of stuff do you have to face on the set day to day?
Well, it's something that we certainly have gotten better at, and we continue to get better the more that we work on the show. But it's a combination of wire work, being on wires, and we had early in the first season we had a choreographer on set who really worked and studied weightlessness and what that would feel like and how to move when you're in that weightless environment. And so there's so many times we're about to do a scene and we're focused on the scene and you're like, wait a minute, are we weightless? Are we? No. Okay, all right. Because, you forget about it and you set your drink down or whatever during the scene. So it comes with awareness, imagination, the wire work and you kind of create this illusion. And then we have Bob Monroe come in later and he'll have something floating in the scene, or we put something up or whatever, and so it kind of really adds to that illusion to make that happen. But the wire work can be a lot of fun. It's funny in season 2, we had this. Breck Eisner was directing 1 and 2, and he's a very detail-oriented guy. And we were shooting in this place called Jumbo. And it's hard to describe how high Jumbo is. I mean, how high is that? I don't know. It's
about 80 feet, I think.
80 feet. And so there's a scene where I'm weightless, and they take me all the way to the top on wires, and I'm upside down with all that stuff on. And when I went there to do it, I was like, nah, don't worry, I can do it. You sure we got the No, I'll do it. So they flip me upside down and have all this gear on and everything, and just keeps going up and up and up. And I'm literally, my feet are touching the ceiling it looks like a city, this thing is so huge. And I'm sitting there, and then of course, Breck, the lighting, the smoke and everybody gets distracted. And I'm just hanging there, and I can feel it. And I'm up there in the ceiling, nobody knows, and I can feel the blood going to my head. And I was like, all right, let's get this going, and they're so focused. Oh, we're sorry, and then we shot the scene. So there are challenges to the wire work.
You can, going the other direction, you can find a couple of YouTube clips where people have put together astronauts forgetting they're not in 0G, doing interviews down on Earth where they'll they'll let a pen go in the air and then go back to it, and it's gone.
That's nice.
So, Shohreh, do you feel left out that you just have gravity all the time, or are you?
Not at all. I'm happy that I don't have to get on those wires. Imagine. So I'm happy.
Don't you at least want a pair of mag boots with your name on it?
Well, honestly, no. I have too much work to do. Things that I have to get done on this Earth, on this planet. I'm not going anywhere somewhere. I have to be here, and I have to, get focused and be, I'm determined to save Earth from its predators.
It's very expensive to animate a sorry and weightlessness.
Yeah. Is there any improvising that you guys do on set, especially when you're in these kind of crazy scenes with conditions going wild?
In our parts, we don't. We're very by the book, meticulous. The writers are doing such a great job, you don't even want to...
Yeah, they better not improvise.
Honestly, I never do that. I don't like doing that. Unless I'm really not comfortable with the words or the sentence, but I won't discuss it on the set. I will call the person, the director or the writer, days in advance, and I will talk about it. It's just, wasting time talking about it on the set. But I never do that, because I truly believe in keeping their dignity and integrity. As all those words, all those writers are doing such a great job that you don't want to interfere. I don't want to interfere.
We are blessed with a great cast on this show, and we have tremendous feedback with everybody. We always talk about the scenes, and everybody goes to the floor feeling real comfortable about it. It's actually a luxury and a rarity in the business, and it's one of the things that makes the show so much fun to do. It really is. These guys are amazing.
Yeah. Well. Well, so another kind of consequence of having all these different gravity scenarios and the difference between belters and Martians and Earthers, you're actually getting a little into the physiology of what happens to people under these different conditions. And maybe, to Jessie, I just might ask, as someone who studies exoplanets, does this have any resonance with what we're starting to discover in planets around other systems and what could inform life on scenarios like this?
Right. So when I'm not watching sci-fi shows, my day job is searching for planets around other stars. And the NASA mission that I work on, Kepler, was specifically designed to find planets like the Earth. And one of the reasons we did that was because life on Earth is so fine-tuned for the conditions on Earth, the gravity, the temperature, the pressure, that kind of thing. And luckily, what Kepler found is that planets like the Earth seem to be very common throughout the galaxy. There's probably hundreds of billions of them, which, great. They're all too far away, but they're out there. But the other really exciting thing that we found is that most of the solar systems we've found so far don't look like our solar system. And then all these crazy types of planets with all these different types of conditions that we never thought of. And what life would look like on those planets under those conditions, like lava oceans or raining glass and all these kinds of exciting things, we have no idea what that is. And, what a scientist likes is unanswered questions. So that's where the excitement is.
Very nice. So we've talked a little bit about what's happening in these different situations. We know that in the show, we have Earth is inhabited, Mars is inhabited, the belt is inhabited. But in season 1, we've mostly seen Earth and we've seen the belt. But in season 2, the good news is we're going to see a little bit more of what life on Mars is like and what life on Mars might be like someday. So let's run a clip and tease a little bit of what's coming up in season 2.
Someday.
Believe me, we were lucky enough to get to watch the first couple episodes before this, and you really want to see the scene after that, too.
So it's basically California 2 months ago.
And California today. It was like before the rain and after the rain, right?
The terraforming happened.
So one of these themes, obviously the goal of Martian society is to terraform their world. They want to make Mars into another Earth. And this is, obviously today we have a lot of discussion about sending people to Mars, initially as colonists, not necessarily as terraformers, but perhaps this will be something that may get talked about as the future goes. Let me kind of toss one to Bethany here. Do you think that the Expanse, as we've seen it here in this series so far, has portrayed a future for us that is actually plausible, or perhaps arguably even inevitable if we don't blow ourselves up in the next 50 years?
Yeah, so I haven't watched a ton of season 2, so I'm really eager to see folks on Mars. I have to say I'm insanely jealous of Draper being able to reach down and pick up and scoop a bunch of Mars soil. I mean, this is what we do with rovers, but it usually takes a day or so of robotic motion to get the picture.
How many grad students would that support, that one handful of soil?
Yeah, that would be fabulous. Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, one of the things that I'm struck by is I think The Expanse is super realistic in terms of how we would go about proceeding through the solar system, right? You need the resource of water above everything. So you go to an ice-rich asteroid like Ceres, where in fact ice we now know is just about that far beneath the surface on the poles, and you harvest it, and you bring it to Mars where it's water poor. And this has been incredibly exciting to watch, is how this whole society takes place using the science of what we know is there. So I'm curious, Ty, did it start with Ceres? Did it start with Mars? Which planet sort of planted the seed in your head for how we would, explore as a civilization 100, 200 years from now?
Well, I mean, I don't remember where it came from, but I mean, you always talk about you build a base on the moon, and you can sort of cook rocket fuel out of lunar dust, and then you use that to get to Mars, and then you cook more rocket fuel out of Mars and start baking oxygen out of the soil to set up little temporary things. In the show, we don't really, or in the books, we don't really get to use the belt until Solomon builds his Epstein drive and makes it a much shorter journey. But that's sort of like the natural progression, it feels like, for those explorations.
Yeah, I mean, some of you in the audience may know there are actually 2 companies, Planetary Resources and Deep Space Industries, that are going great guns for harvesting, for example, near-Earth asteroids, which are swinging around in our neighborhood for some of these very things, raw materials for spacecraft materials as well as water.
We did make
The future may not be 200 years away.
We did make a reference in the show that the ice on Ceres was strip mined off and used to feed the terraformers on Mars, which is why one of the reasons the belt has got a beef with Mars is that they basically took all the water out of Ceres and they used it to terraform the planet.
And does that explain why Ceres in the show doesn't look like Ceres from the Dawn mission, which of course those pictures didn't come in until after you had done this?
No, that was a lucky accident, but yes.
Well, and also you have to bake the surface of Ceres to form a hard shell so that you can spin it.
Well, actually, I've talked about that because I have to admit, when I was watching the show and I realized that, when I was looking at the subway map, I was actually suddenly realizing, oh my God, you've actually just shown me that the series is spun up and that we're getting centrifugal gravity in this. But we know from the probes that we sent to these planets, to these minor planets in the system, in the asteroid belt, that a lot of them really seem like loose rubble, right? And
yeah, they would just fly apart.
Like, do you just spin off a bunch of stuff? Or
so I read this really interesting science paper, and this was probably, God, I was probably a teen. I mean, it might have been in like Omni when I was like 15 or something. But they talked about putting big mirrors in orbit around these asteroids and using it to sort of cook the surface and melt and re-solidify the surface until you had a hard shell.
Oh my God, I think I read that.
Right?
Omni.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
So that is sort of the idea, is that you sort of melt the outside, let it re-harden, and now you have a hard shell, and now you can spin them up to use them as spin stations, because of course the actual gravity of Ceres would be unworkable for long-term human habitation.
And for our JPLers, just how much fun do you think it is to watch a show that's actually taking you in a dramatic sense to basically all the worlds that JPL has taken us to in a robotic sense?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about it. I have some other future ideas for you guys also, if you want to some other places.
We love doing that sort of thing. I actually just recently sent. They had the images from Titan from Cassini-Huygens, we're going to use that to sort of do another probe landing on Venus later on. But it's just, it's nice to do that sort of thing. When you see, Eros, which you're going to see in season 2 as well, and you saw it in season 1, but it's like a giant peanut. I mean, is what it looks like. And it's kind of funny when you see it kind of moving through space. And I think at one point, one of the directors says, like, that's really what it looks like? It looks kind of stupid. And we were like, well, that's what it looks like, so we're just going to figure out a way to not make it stupid.
Right, did you use an actual image for Eros?
Yeah, the image, Bob Monroe and the visual effects team, like, they're real sticklers for that stuff.
Right, that's what I thought.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, actually,
That scene, we were like, I think that's an actual image of Eros.
It really is, yeah.
Bob makes sure that all of our star fields are correct, too.
It's very important, actually, yes. We do look. It's like,
it is to the people in this room.
Yeah, some of us actually pay attention to where the plane of the ecliptic is versus where Orion is, and you don't want those two to cross. It's bad. So let's see. I wanted to kind of throw this out again to just basically anyone on just. Does anyone have any thoughts about how working on the show or watching this show has maybe changed a little bit about how you look at like what NASA does or sort of look at what humanity is doing, not in the 10-year time frame, but in the century time frame? Have you been exposed to anything in this that kind of like has really reoriented the way you look at things?
It's mind-blowing.
Whoever wants to, you want to start?
It's really mind-blowing for me because, I'm not a computer savvy, let alone having the, space education and stuff. But it's, every time I watch it, I read the screenplays, I'm like, I'm learning. I just keep learning, and that's what I love about this particular character that I'm learning from now.
One of the things that I've learned from this show, in addition to a lot of science, is we've taken the show 200 years from now, we've kind of eliminated racism, we've eliminated a lot of the basic fundamental problems of our Earth, but even with, it kind of...
Just kind of moved the racism further out, though.
It became, well, that's what I was going to say, is it became...
Planetism.
It's basically about what kind of gravity you grow up under and which asteroid fields you were bred in, and it's because everyone's a different color. Like it's like a whole rainbow of colors. No longer being a certain skin color becomes a justifiable reason to hate one another. It's really much more of an entitlement thing of what you deserve in terms of where you grew up. Mm-hmm. But what I found fascinating just being here and listening to this, because this room and this school is composed of people from all different backgrounds, all walks of life, all races and cultures, and everyone here is so focused on like a singular vision of just bettering humanity and reaching out further and discovering. And that's, it's a very unique emotional experience to go through, to just feel this energy that's in this room, which has nothing to do with nationality or nationalism or any kind of like selfish kind of goal. It's just, it's exploration, it's discovery, it's furthering humanity. And that's something that this show really pushes the boundaries of. It's like, how far are we willing to go? Like how, in the expanse, right? How far are we willing to go to find out who we really are?
Well, on the flip side, though, at portraying a Martian, do you now feel a little kind of personal affinity? I mean, if you ever look up and see Mars in the sky, you're like, yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. I gotta say, I love that kind of somewhat arrogant little attitude the Martians have, because Ty and Daniel, I said, how did you get this character, this East Indian Pakistani guy with a Texas accent? Where did that come from? What warped part of your brain? And they said, well, we figured, and I thought it was brilliant. It's like, because I would never have thought of this. We figured the people who are so good at creating their own niche, at conquering new terrains, at carving out hostile territory, are the East Indians, the Asians, and the Texans. And those people ended up on Mars. So Alex is a product of that. And I said, that's a really cool thing. So everyone who ended up on Mars were basically the brightest minds, the strongest, the most, like, people who just were willing to take that one-way ticket. So everyone who came hundreds of years later, they're kind of cocky. They have a right to be. I mean, in the same way the United States was an accumulation of all the best and the brightest, and that's why it has that energy about it. And it has a certain kind of pride to itself because it was created by all those people that had those ambition, and Mars is kind of the interstellar version of that. And so I kind of like that.
Can I tell you what I hope happens? Is some 19-year-old here or at MIT or wherever watches the show and goes, Epstein Drive, fusion engines, come on, and they goes, or maybe. And then 50 years from now, when they're like 70, they're running a department that is building the next generation fusion drives, the super efficient fusion drives that take us out there. Because, look how much technology came out of people watching Star Trek and going, communicators, give me a break. Wait, or maybe. And now we have iPhones.
I shed a tear when I finally had to move past my flip phone to get to something that was better than was on Star Trek. So yeah, it's true. Another kind of question for everyone is, we've been talking a lot about science on this panel, but let me try to turn it the other way around and just ask anyone who wants to chime in on this, what effect has science fiction had on you and your life? And has it been inspirational to your careers or I don't know, anyone have something to share in there?
Well, again, mind-boggling, really. And this is a question for the scientists. Since I've started the show, I'm wondering, this takes place in a couple of 100 years from now. I'm wondering if we're still human or if we're being digitized. If we are being digitized, are we robots or are we human who are digitized? Are we advanced to the robots?
So that's a show called Westworld.
And we'll be discussing that next week.
It's a different panel.
So, really, do you think we're going to be digitizing?
I mean, that's something that the show doesn't really talk about, is the fact that, the singularity is coming, where computing technology eventually takes over from us. And, that's a really different type of question, and I'm glad the show hasn't gone that way, because I actually think it's more realistic that in 200 years we're still human, we're still putting on our spaceships, we're still blowing up rocks.
Perfect. So our approach has been right. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's it.
I mean, the other scientists might disagree. This is the best part about science. We don't all have to think the same way.
Anybody else on how science fiction might have sort of played a role in your careers or your directions?
Well, certainly. I mean, for me, I have a PhD in science fiction movies. That's basically where the bulk of my education comes from. But I've always loved space and anything to do with space and science and Blade Runner and Alien, and those are so important to me. So to be able to be a part of something and like this is just a dream come true for me. And it's really great to be able to come together and do this thing with you guys, because this show is for you. We always have that in the back of our heads, the smart, sophisticated fans, and we go through great pains to make the science they go through great pains to make science as accurate as possible, because this is the type of foundation of fans that we want to build and we want to interact with and communicate with. And make something specific for science fiction fans and people that truly love it. So.
In fairness, you go through great pains too if you're stuck in the wire ring for hours. So.
Yeah, and I'll just say that science fiction was super inspirational for me as well. Reading Kim Stanley Robinson's, Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars series was great. I grew up watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, so having that Earl Grey while exploring is fabulous. And I will say, I wonder how much that shows like this actually influence what people think is like politically really possible to do in terms of our human spaceflight exploration, because we can go to Mars now. We just have to choose to do it. And so I love the role that science fiction plays in feeding the passion of folks today to go out and make those dreams a reality and to push for them to actually happen.
I thought Matt Damon went to Mars. I thought we already achieved that.
No, that was Capricorn 1. It was a fake. We didn't really go there.
Oh, I hate that movie.
I hate. Oh God,
just
don't
Buzz
get me
Aldrin was here, he would punch you.
I hate that movie too. Don't worry.
Capricorn 1.
I would just add, I think most of the scientists here and in this room, even if you can't point to one specific thing, like I work on black holes because black holes are just obviously cool. Why are black holes obviously cool? Because, every sci-fi movie and TV show, thinks they're cool, and I've picked that up over the years. And, I think we're all just, that collective influence in just making, geek culture be cool and making it, okay to just say, I love space, and that's something that's just been really cool to see more and more, students and people just being proud of that in a very, public way is just awesome.
There was a great show. I'm sorry. There was a great show on the History Channel called "How William Shatner Saved the World" or "Saved the Universe," and it's William Shatner driving around LA in his Bentley, talking about how Star Trek invented the future. And it's a documentary. It's about, they would show clips from Star Trek and show, this is how we inspired somebody to create the mobile phone and the MRI, and all of these inventors say the same thing, and they go, yeah, we saw that on Star Trek, and I wanted to make that real. And, I watched Star Trek when I was a kid. That's why I became an engineer, and probably I loved it so much that I decided not to be an engineer and become a writer. But it absolutely does have that power to inspire, and that's, again, I'm with Ty. It's like I hope somebody watches the show and then someday makes an Epstein drive.
Well, and growing up like Star Trek, a lot of us were inspired by this, but with the original series, the fact that you had a science officer on the bridge was actually making a really strong statement. Here's someone who does science, and it's important. He's second in command. I would kind of comment in the Expanse. We've talked a lot about the science that people just have to live with in their day-to-day in the way the show's done. But we've seen a couple scientists in the show, but kind of, when we run into scientists on the Expanse, they're sort of a-holes. Well, were we ever going to see anyone who's maybe a little more sympathetic?
So you're talking about the scientist we run into in the first 2 episodes of the second season. Why he's an a-hole is explained.
Oh, yeah.
And the truth is, let's face it, Naomi's a scientist. She works on, she's an engineer, works on fusion drives as her day job. There's and she has a buddy who's a scientist in the second season who's very cool, and only wants to go out and explore and learn things. So you've only seen the jerk scientists so far.
I don't think they're jerks though. They're not a-holes. Dresden he's impatient because everybody else around him is much dumber than him. and
I think that's something that everyone in the room, we understand.
No, that's Naren. That's Naren. He's projecting a little.
Well, I'll throw one final question then out to the scientists for as our revenge. Is there anything that you've seen in the show that you want to call them out on now that you got them right here on stage? Wow. What did the Expanse screw up that you can now talk about?
We won't care.
Bring it out.
So it's not really wrong per se, but one thing that surprised me was the lack of automation in the mining of the asteroid belt. Bobak landed a rover on Mars with a sky crane. Why are we sending little guys out in their spacesuits to put dynamite sticks in a rock and then run away and then that seems like in 200 years maybe we'll have a better way to do that doesn't involve meat bags.
Do you know what's really boring to watch?
Are you saying landing a rover on Mars is boring to watch?
No. What I'm saying is, on a TV show, watching the rover, because I don't have any investment in whether that thing gets blown up.
I think there's some people here who would disagree.
Plus, it's TV. Nobody cares about the romantic life of rovers.
Wouldn't that be an awesome TV show?
No, it really wouldn't.
Well,
it's called WALL-E. Curiosity. It's a great movie, WALL-E, and it's all about the romantic life of robots.
I think we're detecting a little carbon chauvinism on the panel.
Yeah.
So, well,
someday we will have to kill all the robots to stop them from killing us.
Well, as long as we're not robots.
You're not being very sympathetic to the robots. You just need to get rid of the meat bags so that they can evolve properly. So, well, on that note, I think we can actually open up a little bit for questions from the audience here. I think we're going to have 2 microphones out in the walkways here. So if you have a question, if you want to just sort of get up and line up, we'll sort of take people as they appear. First volunteer making his way up.
You've answered everything?
Yeah.
JPL shirt, so you're one of the people grading, right?
That's right.
I wouldn't say I'm grading, but I do work at JPL. So I'm a big fan of the books, and watching the show, I've noticed you decided to bring in a lot of characters earlier than they appear in the books, which I think is a really cool decision. It's cool seeing what Avasarala is doing during Leviathan Wakes. It'll be cool seeing Bobby. Can you go through your decision to bring in some characters earlier, and are there other characters we can expect to see earlier than they actually would appear in the progression?
One of the things that happened very early on, this was even in the pilot stage, was the original book Leviathan Wakes is told entirely from two perspectives. It's just Holden and Miller. And very early on, it was, everybody understood that we just needed to broaden the scope of the show. Avasarala's character was brought in from the second book. And as we developed season 1, we realized there was a great opportunity because Tyne Daniel had really fleshed out the world with the novellas, that we could actually open up the scope of the entire expanse, of the entire solar system, and while still adapting the book and staying true to the plot, we could actually deepen it, delving into the characters, bringing other characters in, creating new stuff when we needed to. There are moments in the book, there like an offhand mention of a rock hopper doing a suicide drive against a ship. It's like 3 sentences in the book. We turned it into an entire storyline in one of the episodes, and that's actually enabled us, I think, to really kind of open up the show in a very, very good way, and we're going to continue to do it that way as we go along.
I think we've got one over here. Yeah.
Hi, first of all, big fan, all of you guys, awesome. So thank you for doing this. Is there an aspect of either the story or your character that you would like to highlight for us that might not naturally necessarily come out, that we might have missed, that you want to, tell us about, to notice? Maybe that's important to you guys.
I really like Broadway.
Anyone else?
That sounds like a Wes question to me.
Great question, actually.
Well, there is a part of the book series, a book called The Churn, and it's about Amos specifically, and his journey to get to where he is and how he became Amos. And I fell in love with that novella, and I read it, especially when I'm working, probably every couple of months, to kind of really remind myself of who he is and where he came from. And I would recommend, if people here are reading the series, to read that book, but to really kind of get an understanding of Amos and what's going on with him psychologically. To really get into it here, it would take a long time, but I'm excited about in season 2, you really start to get to see why he is the way he is, what is his connection to Naomi, and what happens when that relationship is strained, and what is he without her. And so I'm really excited about having Amos be revealed over season 2 and hopefully over season 3, and kind of get to who he really is.
We have decided to stop revealing Amos in season 3.
Replaced with a robot.
Might be a robot now.
Silicon solidarity.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming out. My question was about kind of the process of creating the world inside the Expanse. So kind of clearly there were Japanese influences, for instance, right? Like Holden and Miller hiding in a pachinko parlor at one point, and at another point one of his favorite places a ramen bar on series. Kind of what was the process in creating that world and taking influences from society and culture here?
Yeah, so one of the things that Daniel and I insisted on when we were working with Mark and Hawk at the very beginning of this, and when Naren came on board, he was absolutely in agreement with us. And fortunately, we had a studio that agreed with us as we were producing the show, is that this show could not be white men in space. And so having influences from every culture on Earth, and having people who look like people from every culture on Earth, and really getting to show that it's a species-wide endeavor to go out into space and not just one really narrow slice of our species was really important. And so every opportunity we had to sort of spread the culture out and bring new little pieces in that aren't just one specific culture, we did it every chance we could.
Thank you for that. Honestly, as a person who grew up not seeing a lot of people who look like myself on TV, I'm sitting next to two people who look a lot like me, who are in science fiction. That's amazing, and I really appreciate that, genuinely.
We all do.
I will say, though, that Shohreh is way better looking than him. It's pretty clear.
One thing I noticed that a lot of people don't always pick up on about this show, which I'm so proud of, is in addition to the racial diversity that's in there, the women that are portrayed in the show incredibly strongly. How many shows do you know that have 3 or 4 leading women, none of whom are white, and none of whom revolve around a man? And that's all of our female cast in this show. In addition to the cultural diversity, we have an incredibly powerful female heroines in the show, which I really find an incredible accomplishment. So that's something I'm very proud to be part of.
I swear I thought of this question before you guys were talking about race, so, and I can't change it now because it's in my head. But I really wanted to thank you all for making the show about people who look like me. I'm a son of immigrants. I'm an immigrant myself. So thank you so much, Ty and Naren and Cass, I guess. Obviously, Cass.
I worked really hard on that.
Thank you. No, Cass, seriously, like, someday I want to cosplay as you, even though you're like about 100 times better looking than I am.
That's our sign. That's our big sign in the geek world. When someone cosplays as you.
Hey,
so
there's not
hold
many
you to it.
brown sci-fi characters I can cosplay as, so thank you.
All right, everyone go out for Comic-Con this year. Cosplaying everyone from Expanse, right?
There you go.
Well, thank you.
I have a quick question about the writing. So when you're doing something like pulling that high G maneuver and the future juice starts getting pumped in, it completely fits, right? It makes sense, even if you're coming from a science background. But I think, as Wes mentioned, if you start beaming laser guns to people, there's clearly it's jarring, right? And so how do you figure out where you can kind of push the boundaries of science as we currently know it, and where it's not worth doing that for narrative?
Yeah, so I have a vision for what the tech of the world is, and I'm sort of the guardian of that in the books. And when we write the show, Naren and I have a lot of conversations about what fits and what doesn't, and mostly agree on it.
Yeah, we have a very similar aesthetic, I think, at the end of the day, and it's kind of like a no bullshit thing. It's like I had my share of tractor beams and phasers and all that stuff and inertial dampers. And
we will never solve a problem by reversing the polarity in the deflector array.
One of the things that I love is that when we show space battles, our space battles are people throwing very heavy projectiles at each other extremely fast. And they punch through the ships instantaneously. It's like when our rail guns, our missiles, it all they're more like, battles from the age of sail. It's really how we portray them. And it's so different and unique and interesting when you see this in a science fiction context. And I think that, if we're fortunate enough to get to do the show for a long time, I hope to undo every one of these, sci-fi bad tropes that we can. I mean, there's an opening in the 3rd book that I love that we have to do, which is the slingshotter who goes into the ring, and he stops instantaneously, and he's going so fast that he just turns into paste, like instantaneously. And it's so good. I guarantee you, we're going to do that. It's like, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, so if you go from 200,000 kilometers a minute to 0 in 5 seconds, you get pasted. I don't know if you guys know that.
I guess the injection goo is not helping.
No,
you
not at that level.
So this question kind of hits, I'm asking it for someone else, it kind of hits back on the cosplay we were talking about. is more specifically the MCRN rank structure and insignia, if you guys have sort of worked that out quite yet, and also when merchandise will start being released.
Swag. We want swag.
We actually do. We have rank insignia. When you see the Martian Marines, you'll see that they have rank insignias on their shoulders that that Naren and I and our production designer and our concept artist sort of came up with together. That looks enough like modern insignias that it's obvious what it is, but is different enough.
And different countries' service insignia sort of like melded together. We didn't want to make it just like, United States insignia or British or anything like that. So there's lots of influences in them. We're a little hyper-focused on details, which is a good thing, I think, but it's certainly, yeah.
And if you speak Chinese, when you see their little badges with the ship name, underneath it is the motto of that ship written in Chinese script.
Yeah. So the Martians have, English and Chinese.
Made in Chinese?
Yeah.
Made in China.
Nice.
Merchandise.
Yeah, so our studio is working on things, which we cannot tell you about.
I think there's some NBC Universal reps floating around.
Yes.
Talk to them. They like
Studio's
they like
Alcon
pitchings.
Television. Our studio's Alcon Television, and so that's where you're going to be getting your stuff.
Yes.
Next question. Oh, sorry, is the one over here? Go ahead. I think you were up there first. So.
Yeah, this question actually is for Jessie. You made a comment earlier. You said that you thought there were probably millions of planets with similar characteristics to Earth throughout the galaxy, but they were very far away. Based on that, what degree of certainty do you have that there is life elsewhere in the galaxy, and how recognizable do you think that will be when we discover it, and how long do you think it'll be before we discover life elsewhere in the galaxy?
Oh, what a great question. Given the prevalence of planets like the Earth and how rapidly life evolved on Earth when the conditions were right, like once the surface had solidified, once the temperature was where water was liquid, those all point to the evolution of very simple, like single-celled life possibly being energetically favorable and therefore likely. It was a long time after single-celled life evolved before multiple-celled life evolved, and that jump might be very difficult, and we just don't have enough information to really speculate beyond, there's lots and I really hope so.
It's very hard to do statistics on a sample size of 1.
Yeah, so, we're trying as hard as we can. All of the SETI stuff, like the Allen Telescope Array up at Berkeley, all the breakthrough listen stuff, there's lots of different efforts to try and look for life out there. At the moment, we're scientists, we can extrapolate. It might look like us. If it looks like us, maybe it communicates like us, maybe it uses radios. We just have to hope.
I was going to say there's 3 great planets or planetary bodies in our solar system to check this out: Mars, Europa, and Enceladus. There's water there now. There might be water inside some of these other moons, and there might be weird life in the organic seas of Titan. So we've got some work to do in our solar system to try to increase above n equals 1 in terms of places that we know have life.
And the significance, of course, if we find life independently evolved 2 different places in the solar system, that answers the question. It's easy.
Mm-hmm.
Water, heat, and you got it. So, yeah, it's a cool
We
thing.
have in episode 11 of this season, it's a mini spoiler, we have a specific conversation about the Drake equation and the Fermi paradox exactly in this context.
Easy.
Nice. So let's see. We're running close to the end here, but it looks like we only have 3 more people with questions. So if we go quickly, I think we can maybe just round this all off. Or at least, so go ahead.
This isn't really scientific, so I apologize, but my favorite thing about the series is how much Christian swears. Considering that you work in broadcast television, are we ever going to get to see some of that?
Absolutely. Wait until you see the second season. She opens the door with a kick.
That was my
promise you.
favorite line of the,
Yes.
yeah, nice.
Thank
The
you.
Sorella Unleashed.
All right, so this sort of relates to what you mentioned. You're the keeper of the scientific reality in the future, as you said. And, well, this is called the science of the Expanse. The sort of true wild card you have in the Expanse is the blue, gooey thing. So I was thinking sort of, are you drawing any inspiration from reality with that? Where are you getting your creative ideas for that? And also, what do the scientists on the panel think of this, like, mysterious tech that was created somewhere in the belt and can absorb energy, recreate human life. Like, where are you guys going with that?
Created or found?
So given that this is, I guess, the last question, because the guy behind you had the same one, we've now set it up for the blue goo. This is, take it home, guys.
And keep in mind, it was found on Phoebe, which is really obviously an extrasolar object that was captured by Saturn.
Phoebe is totally bizarre. I can vouch
right?
for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it didn't come from here, but yeah, I mean, obviously there's elements in there that look like nanotech, and elements in there that look like engineered viruses, and all of that stuff goes in there. Its method of spreading is stolen directly from Ebola. Yeah. So
terrifying.
Yeah. No, it's awful when people throw up on you and then you have what they had.
Chamber.
For dinner.
I was gonna say, I thought you took your inspiration from like slime molds and some of these things that live in like the dark rainforests and deep at the bottom of the ocean, and you can just see them spreading over everything.
All the
and
scariest
kind of
stuff on our
bioluminescent.
planet is the little stuff. The really tiny stuff is very scary because you can't shoot it.
Oh my God.
Well, on that note, let's thank our panelists for a really awesome conversation tonight. There have been a great many people that made this possible, and so many people who have volunteered a tremendous amount of time to get this set up and to come to us in really bad circumstances. I can't let this end without Wes. Please tell us, of everyone on the panel, you're probably the one that has the best excuse for not being here tonight, but you came here tonight despite what happened to you?
What happened?
Such a method actor.
I got my my tooth knocked out in doing jiu-jitsu before we came. So I rushed to the dentist. They put a fake one on that'll last for a while, and then
here he is.
Made it on time.
So I guess that's it. Good night.
Thank you.